The explosion ripped through the ship's hull like paper. Metal screamed and twisted as the vacuum of space tried to pull everything out into the darkness. Daehyun grabbed the nearest support beam and held on while his crew scrambled for their emergency suits. He was a captain in the Human Defense Force, though his rank was actually much higher. Nobody needed to know that right now. His ship, a small frigate called the Morning Star, had been patrolling the edge of human space when the Velixians attacked. The Velixians were insect-like creatures, tall and covered in hard shells that looked like armor. They had been conquering star systems for decades, and now they wanted human colonies. They thought humans were weak. They thought humans would be easy to defeat. They were wrong. But today the Velixians had the advantage. 3 of their war cruisers surrounded the Morning Star. Daehyun's ship was damaged and losing power. His weapons were offline. He had maybe 20 crew members left alive, and half of them were injured. "Captain," shouted Taemin, a young private who looked terrified. Blood ran down the side of his face from a cut above his eye. "They're boarding us!" Daehyun looked at his remaining crew. He could see the fear in their eyes. They all knew what happened to human prisoners. The Velixians were not kind to those they captured. "Listen to me," Daehyun said calmly. His voice was steady, like he was discussing the weather instead of their impending capture. "When they take us, say nothing. Give them your name and rank, nothing more. Do you understand?" The crew nodded. Taemin wiped blood from his face with a shaking hand. "What about you, sir?" "I'll be fine," Daehyun replied. "Just remember what I said." The boarding doors exploded inward. Velixian soldiers rushed through, their weapons raised. They moved like insects, quick and jerky, their mandibles clicking as they communicated with each other. Their eyes were large and black, showing no emotion that humans could understand. "On your knees," one of them shouted in rough, translated human language. "Hands behind your heads." The crew obeyed. Daehyun knelt slowly, keeping his hands visible. He watched everything carefully. The number of soldiers, their weapons, their movements, how they communicated, where they positioned themselves. He memorized it all. A larger Velixian entered the bridge. His shell was decorated with marks that showed high rank. This was Commander Vrax, though Daehyun didn't know the name yet. The commander looked at the human prisoners with what might have been amusement. "Humans," Vrax said, his voice like gravel grinding together. "So weak, so soft. Your ship breaks so easily." "You break so easily," none of the prisoners responded. Vrax walked closer to Daehyun, looking down at him. You are the captain?" "Yes," Daehyun answered simply. "You will tell us everything about your defenses, your bases, your fleet positions, or you will suffer." Daehyun looked up at the commander. His face showed nothing, no fear, no anger, nothing. "I will give you my name and rank, that is all." Vrax made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. "We will see." The human prisoners were dragged off the Morning Star and taken to the Velixian war cruiser. The ship was massive, 10 times the size of Daehyun's frigate. Inside, everything was dark and humid, designed for the insect-like aliens who lived there. The corridors were narrow and confusing, turning in strange directions. Daehyun counted his steps. He noted every turn, every door, every guard post. He memorized the layout as they walked. This was something he had done many times before, though the Velixians didn't know that. The prisoners were thrown into a holding cell. It was a large room with metal walls and a single heavy door. There were no windows, no beds, just cold metal and dim lighting. The surviving crew members huddled together, whispering to each other in worried voices. Taemin sat down next to Daehyun. The young private's hands were still shaking. "Sir," he whispered, "what are they going to do to us?" "They'll try to make us talk," Daehyun said quietly. "They'll use fear, pain, whatever they think will work." "Will it work?" Daehyun looked at the young soldier. "That depends on us. Remember your training. Remember who you are. Remember that pain is temporary, but betraying your fellow soldiers lasts forever." Hours passed, maybe days. It was hard to tell in the windowless cell with no clocks. The guards brought food that was barely edible and water that tasted like metal. They took prisoners out one by one for questioning. Those who returned looked shaken but said nothing about what happened. When they came for Daehyun, he stood calmly and walked with them. They took him to a different room, smaller and colder. A female Velixian waited there. She was smaller than the soldiers, but somehow more frightening. Her movements were precise and calculated. "I am Shix," she said. I am an interrogator. My job is to get information from prisoners. I am very good at my job. Daehyun said nothing. He sat in the chair they pushed him into and waited. You are the captain of the human ship, Shix continued. You know things we want to know. You will tell me these things. Captain Daehyun, Human Defense Force, he replied. Serial number 4729831. That is not what I want, Shix said. She moved closer. Where are your main bases? How many ships do you have? What are your defense codes? Captain Daehyun, Human Defense Force, serial number 4729831. The interrogation lasted for hours. Shix tried everything, threats, pain, promises, nothing worked. Daehyun repeated his name and number and nothing else. His face remained blank, his voice steady. It was like he felt nothing, feared nothing. Finally, they took him back to the cell. He sat down against the wall, his body bruised but his mind clear. Taemin looked at him with wide eyes. Sir, how do you do it? How do you stay so calm? Daehyun looked at the young soldier. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear or pain, but something else. Something cold and patient. Because they don't know who I am, he said quietly. And by the time they figure it out, it will be too late. Taemin didn't understand what that meant. But he would soon. They all would. Meanwhile, far away in human space, Lieutenant Hana sat in her damaged shuttle. She had escaped the attack on the Morning Star and was trying to reach the nearest human base. Her communications were damaged, but she kept trying to send a message. The same message over and over, priority alert. Captain Daehyun captured by Velixian forces. Repeat, Daehyun is captured. They don't know who he is. Send immediate support. She knew what would happen when Earth Command received her message. They would panic. Because Daehyun wasn't just a captain. He was so much more. And the Velixians had just made the biggest mistake of their war. They had captured the Reaper. Rin was a scout in the Velixian military. He was younger than most of the soldiers on the war cruiser, and he had a habit of being curious about things. Too curious, his commander said, but that curiosity had saved his life more than once. Now as he sat in front of his computer screen, that curiosity was telling him something was wrong with the human prisoner they had captured. Rin had been reviewing the data they took from the destroyed human ship. Most of it was damaged or encrypted, but he had found some interesting files, communication records mostly, and in those records one word kept appearing over and over: Reaper. At first, Rin thought it was just a code name for a weapon or a ship. Humans like to give things dramatic names, but the more he read, the more he realized this wasn't about a weapon. It was about a person. The messages were fragments, pieces of conversations that hadn't been fully deleted. Reaper confirmed for Operation Black Knight. Reaper extracted the prisoners from Corvin Fortress. Reaper's team successful, 0 casualties. Rin felt a chill run down his spine. He pulled up the file on their human prisoner, the captain. Standard information, named Daehyun. Rank captain. Nothing special. Just another human officer. But Rin decided to run the prisoner's biometric data through their intelligence database. It was probably nothing, he told himself. Just to be sure, the computer took a long time to search. When the results came back, Rin's mandibles clicked together in shock. He read the file once, then twice, then a third time, unable to believe what he was seeing. The prisoner wasn't a captain. He was a colonel, a highly decorated special operations commander, and his code name was Reaper. Rin's hands shook as he read through the file. This human, this quiet prisoner they had been torturing for information, had a record that seemed impossible. He had led missions that no one should have survived. He had defeated entire enemy units with just a handful of soldiers. He had escaped from prisons that were supposed to be escape-proof, and at the bottom of the file, in bright red letters, was a warning. Do not capture alive. Terminate on sight. Extreme danger. Rin jumped from his chair and ran toward the command bridge. He had to tell Commander Vrax they had to do something. Now. But when he reached the bridge, he was too late. Commander Vrax stood in front of a camera, broadcasting to all nearby human colonies. Behind him, restrained by 2 large guards, stood Daehyun. The human's face was bruised from interrogation, but his expression remained blank. People of Earth, Vrax said, his voice full of pride. Look at your soldier. Look at how weak he is. We have captured him so easily. Your defenses mean nothing to us. Surrender now, or all your soldiers will share his fate. Rin tried to push through the crowd of officers watching the broadcast. "Commander! You need to stop. That prisoner, he's not—" But his words were drowned out by a sudden change in the broadcast. The human communication channel had been hacked into their system. A new image appeared on the screen overlaying Vrax's broadcast. It was a human admiral, an older man with gray hair and cold eyes. His uniform was covered with medals and badges that showed high rank. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was something dangerous underneath it. "Commander Vrax of the Velixian Empire, I am Admiral Kim of Earth Defense Command. I am sending this message to warn you. The prisoner you have captured is not who you think he is." The bridge went silent. All the Velixian officers stared at the screen. "That man is Colonel Dae-hyun, commander of Special Operations Division. His code name is Reaper. He has never failed a mission. He has never abandoned his soldiers, and he has turned every capture into an opportunity to strike back at his enemies." The admiral paused, letting his words sink in. "Commander Vrax, I strongly advise you to release Colonel Dae-hyun and his crew immediately. Return them to us unharmed, and we will consider your actions an unfortunate mistake of war. But if you harm him, if you continue to hold him, you will learn why we call him the Reaper, and your ship will become his hunting ground." Vrax stared at the screen for a moment. Then he started laughing. His mandibles clicked together in a sound like breaking glass. "This is a trick. A desperate bluff. You want us to fear one single human? Impossible!" He turned off the broadcast and waved his hand dismissively. "Take the prisoner back to his cell. Double the guards. This changes nothing." But Rin noticed something as the guards dragged Dae-hyun away. The human prisoner was looking directly at the camera, and for just a moment he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold and predatory, like a hunter who had just spotted his prey. Rin felt fear grip his heart. He pulled up the prisoner's file again and read through the list of his missions. Operation Black Knight. Destroyed an entire enemy fleet with 12 soldiers. Corvin prison break. Infiltrated a maximum security prison and extracted 47 prisoners without a single shot fired. Red Desert campaign. Survived behind enemy lines for 3 months and crippled their supply lines. Every mission had a pattern. This human, this Reaper, he didn't just survive impossible situations. He thrived in them. He turned disadvantages into advantages. He made his enemies' strengths become their weaknesses, and now they had put him inside their ship, given him time to study their security, their routines, their weaknesses. They had given him exactly what he needed. Rin tried again to warn Commander Vrax, but the commander refused to listen. "He is one human. We have hundreds of soldiers. What can he possibly do?" Back in the holding cell, Taimin stared at Dae-hyun with new understanding. The young private had heard the broadcast. He had heard the admiral's message. He finally understood who his captain really was. "Sir," Taimin whispered, "is it true? Are you really—" Dae-hyun sat against the wall, his eyes closed, but there was a slight smile on his face. "The Velixians made a mistake, Taimin. They gave me time to learn their ship. They showed me their weaknesses. They let me rest and recover." He opened his eyes and looked at the young soldier. "And most importantly, they underestimated what a human can do when he has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for." "What are we going to do?" asked another crew member, a woman named Ji-won who had been quietly listening. Dae-hyun reached into his boot. Hidden there, overlooked by the Velixians during their searches, was a small piece of sharpened metal. He had found it during one of his interrogations and concealed it carefully. "We wait for the right moment," he said quietly, "and then we show them what happens when you capture the Reaper." Throughout the ship, Velixian soldiers were beginning to whisper among themselves. They had heard about the Admiral's message. Some of them had looked up information about this human called the Reaper. The stories they found made them nervous. Interrogator Shik stood in her office reviewing her sessions with Dae-hyun. She thought about how calm he had been, how he never showed fear or pain. She thought about the way he had watched everything, studied everything, memorized everything. For the first time since becoming an interrogator, Shix felt afraid. Not of what the prisoner might tell her, but of what he might do. She had tortured him for hours, thinking she was breaking him down. But now she realized the truth. He hadn't been suffering. He had been learning. Studying her methods, her patterns, her weaknesses, she had given the Reaper exactly what he needed. Information. That night, As the ship's lights dimmed for the sleep cycle, something changed in the air. The guards felt it. The officers felt it. Even Commander Vrax, sitting on his bridge, felt a strange unease he couldn't explain. In the holding cell, Daehyun opened his eyes. He had been counting. Guard rotations, door cycles, security checks. He knew their patterns now. He knew when they would be most vulnerable. The hunt was about to begin. The alarm started at 0300 hours, during the middle of the night cycle when most of the crew was sleeping. At first, it seemed like a minor technical problem. A door malfunction in Section 7. Nothing serious. But then the guards at the holding cell realized something terrible. The cell was empty. The human prisoners were gone. Commander Vrax was pulled from his sleep by frantic reports. All human prisoners have escaped. 2 guards are unconscious. The cell door was open from the inside. Vrax felt his mandibles click together in rage. How? We doubled the guards. We increased security. Unknown, Commander. The surveillance shows nothing. The cameras in that section stopped working just before the escape. Vrax slammed his fist on the console. He knew who was responsible. The Reaper. That cursed human. Find them. Lock down all sections. I want every soldier searching. But Daehyun had no intention of being found. Not yet. He moved through the ventilation shafts like a ghost, leading his small group of freed prisoners. Taemin followed close behind, carrying a Velixian weapon they had taken from one of the unconscious guards. Jiwon and 3 other crew members came after, moving as quietly as they could. Where are we going? Jiwon whispered. Engineering first, Daehyun replied quietly. We need to secure the power systems. Then we work our way up. Taemin looked confused. Work our way up? Sir, shouldn't we be trying to escape? Daehyun stopped and turned to look at his crew. In the dim light of the shaft, his eyes looked cold and determined. We're not escaping, Taemin. We're taking the ship. The crew members stared at him in shock. Take the ship? There were only 6 of them, and the Velixian war cruiser had over 300 soldiers aboard. I know what you're thinking, Daehyun said. The odds are impossible. But the Velixians think the same way. They think we'll try to run, to hide, to find an escape pod. They'll never expect us to attack. That's our advantage. He started moving again, and the crew followed. Because despite the insane plan, despite the impossible odds, they trusted him. He was the Reaper. And the Reaper never failed. They reached the engineering section through a maintenance hatch. Only 2 Velixian guards were stationed there, both looking nervous after hearing about the escape. Daehyun dropped silently behind the first guard and knocked him unconscious before he could make a sound. Ji-won, who had military combat training, took down the second guard. Taemin, Ji-won, you hold this position, Daehyun ordered. Don't let anyone through. If the Velixians regain control of engineering, we lose. Understand? Both soldiers nodded. Daehyun gave them the captured weapons and moved to the engineering console. His fingers worked quickly across the alien interface. Years of studying Velixian technology and training simulations paid off now. Within minutes, he had isolated the ship's internal communication system. Different sections of the ship could no longer talk to each other easily. The Velixian soldiers would have to rely on runners to carry messages, slowing their response time. Next, he began sabotaging the surveillance network. Camera feeds went dark in random sections. The Velixians would waste time checking each one, never knowing where the humans really were. Sir, we have movement, Ji-won warned. Velixian patrol coming down the corridor. How many? 4 soldiers. Daehyun quickly finished his work at the console and joined his crew at the entrance. We can't let them raise the alarm. Take them quietly. When the Velixian patrol entered the engineering section, they found it apparently empty. The guards looked around in confusion. Where were their people? Why weren't the engineers at their stations? They never saw the humans drop from the overhead pipes. 4 quick, silent takedowns. The patrol was unconscious before they could send a warning. Daehyun stripped one of the Velixian soldiers of his communication device. He listened to the frantic chatter. The Velixians were panicking. Search teams were running through the ship randomly with no coordination. Perfect. On the bridge, Commander Vrax was realizing that he had lost control of the situation. Reports came in of more unconscious guards. Equipment malfunctions in multiple sections. Strange noises in the ventilation system. Where are they? He roared. How can 6 humans hide on my ship? Interrogator Schick stood nearby, her expression cold but her mind racing. They're not hiding, Commander. They're hunting. The Reaper is turning our ship into his battlefield. Vrax turned on her. Then tell me how to stop him. I don't know, Shix admitted. Everything I learned about him says he shouldn't be able to do this. But he is. He's using our own ship against us. Our own tactics. He's in our walls, our systems, our minds. Scout Rin spoke up from his station. Commander, we should seal off sections and retreat to defended positions. If we spread out trying to search for them, he'll pick us off one by one. It was good advice, but it came too late. Daehyun had already done too much damage. The ship's systems were compromised. The crew was scared and disorganized. And more importantly, he had them reacting instead of acting. Hours passed. The Velixians found more unconscious guards, more sabotaged equipment, more signs that the humans were everywhere and nowhere. Soldiers began refusing to patrol alone. Some abandoned their posts entirely, too afraid to stay in isolated sections. Discipline was breaking down. And that was exactly what Daehyun wanted. In a darkened corridor on Deck 3, Rin found himself face to face with the Reaper. The young scout had been sent alone to check a malfunctioning door. Now he stood frozen as the human stepped out of the shadows. Daehyun looked at him calmly. You're the one who tried to warn them. The scout. Rin's hand shook on his weapon. How did you know? I pay attention, Daehyun said simply. You're smarter than your commander. You knew what I was. You tried to warn him. Are you going to kill me? Daehyun shook his head. No, I'm going to give you a message. Go back to Vrax, tell him this ship is mine now. Tell him that every hour he waits I get stronger and he gets weaker. Tell him that this is what happens when you underestimate humans. Rin stared at him. You can't win. There are too many of us. Numbers don't matter when your enemy controls your fear, Daehyun replied. Your soldiers are already beaten. They just don't know it yet. He stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. Rin stood there for a long moment, his heart pounding. Then he ran back to the bridge as fast as he could. Meanwhile, far away from the Velixian ship, Lieutenant Hana's shuttle finally reached a human base. She burst into the command center, exhausted but determined. We need a strike fleet, she said without introduction. Colonel Daehyun is captured on a Velixian war cruiser. We need to go get him. The base commander looked at her seriously. We received Admiral Kim's message. A fleet is already being assembled. We leave in 6 hours. Hana nodded, relief washing over her, but she also felt worry. 6 hours? Could Daehyun survive that long inside an enemy ship? She didn't know that Daehyun wasn't trying to survive. He was trying to conquer. Back on the Velixian cruiser, Daehyun stood in a hidden maintenance room, looking at a map of the ship he had drawn from memory. He marked the locations of his crew, the positions of Velixian forces, the critical systems he still needed to control. Taemin's voice came through the stolen communicator. Sir, we're holding engineering, but the Velixians are gathering a large force to retake it. Let them come, Daehyun replied. I'm about to give them something else to worry about. He moved toward the ship's main power core. The hunt was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. The explosion echoed through the ship like thunder. In the main power core chamber, alarms screamed and lights flickered. Velixian engineers ran in panic, trying to understand what had happened. Daehyun had planted small charges on 3 secondary power relays. Not enough to destroy the ship, but enough to cause chaos. The power to life support, artificial gravity, and weapon systems fluctuated wildly. Throughout the ship, systems went offline and came back online randomly. On the bridge, Commander Vrax grabbed the edge of his console as the artificial gravity briefly cut out. What is happening? The power core is damaged, Commander, an engineer reported, but we don't understand how. The humans are trapped in engineering, but the explosions came from the power chamber. That's on the other side of the ship. Shix stepped forward, her voice urgent. He's manipulating us. The humans in engineering are a distraction. The Reaper is somewhere else, sabotaging critical systems. We need to stop reacting and start thinking. Vrax's mandibles clicked together in frustration. Fine, seal all critical areas. Post guards at every major system. And send a full assault team to retake engineering. But it was already too late. The Velixian war cruiser was no longer a ship under Vrax's command. It was a battlefield, and Daehyun had been preparing this battlefield for hours. When the Velixian assault team reached engineering, they found it defended by only 2 humans. Taemin and Jiwon had set up a barricade using equipment and disabled machinery. They had limited ammunition, but they had the advantage of a choke point. The Velixians attacked with overwhelming force. Energy weapons lit up the corridor, but every time they tried to push through the barricade, precise shots from the humans forced them back. Taemin and Jiwon weren't trying to win. They were just buying time. Time for Daehyun to complete his real objective. In the medical bay, Shix was trying to organize a response when she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around to find Daehyun standing in the doorway. His face was dirty and bruised, but his eyes were cold and focused. "How did you get here?" she demanded. "This section is sealed. Your security measures assume the enemy doesn't know your ship better than you do," Daehyun replied calmly. "I've been studying this vessel since you captured me. Every corridor, every vent, every maintenance shaft. I know ways to move through this ship that your own crew doesn't know." Shix reached for her weapon, but Daehyun raised his hand. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to talk." "Talk about what?" "Surrender. Tell Vrax to surrender this ship. Let me and my crew go free. In return, I'll stop the sabotage and you can keep your lives." Shix stared at him in disbelief. "You're insane. You're 6 humans on a ship with hundreds of our soldiers. We should be demanding your surrender." Daehyun's expression didn't change. "Then let me show you something." He pulled out a small device from his pocket. It looked like a detonator. "I've planted charges throughout your ship. Not just the power core, the navigation system, the weapons control, the life support. I can destroy any or all of them with this device." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Check your systems." "Really check them? See what I've had access to while your soldiers were running around in circles looking for me?" Shix's face showed doubt for the first time. She activated her communicator. "Bridge, run a full diagnostic on all critical systems. Check for tampering or foreign devices." The response came back minutes later. The fear in the engineer's voice was clear. "Interrogator Shix, we've found explosive devices in 7 critical locations. They're small but placed perfectly to cause maximum damage. If they detonate, the ship will be crippled, maybe destroyed." Shix looked at Daehyun with new understanding. "You've been everywhere. You've done all this while we thought we were hunting you." "I told you before," Daehyun said quietly. "I didn't come here to escape. I came here to send a message. The message is this: humans are not your victims. We don't just survive. We fight back. And when you think you've won, that's when we're most dangerous." Before Shix could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. New ones, different from before. The communication systems suddenly came back online, but they weren't under Velixian control. A voice echoed through every speaker on the ship. Lieutenant Hana's voice. "Velixian war cruiser, this is the Human Defense Force strike fleet. We have you surrounded. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. If you resist, you will be destroyed." Daehyun smiled slightly. Perfect timing. On the bridge, Vrax stared at the tactical display in horror. 8 human warships had appeared from hyperspace, completely surrounding his cruiser. He had been so focused on the enemy inside his ship that he hadn't noticed the enemy approaching from outside. "Commander, what do we do?" asked one of his officers, panic clear in his voice. Vrax wanted to fight. His pride demanded it, but Shix's voice came through his communicator. "Commander, the human prisoner has rigged our ship with explosives. Our weapons are compromised. Our power systems are failing. And now we're surrounded by enemy ships. We have no choice." For a long moment, Vrax stood frozen. His entire invasion force, his pride, his career, everything was falling apart because of one human. One soldier who refused to stay captured. "Power down weapons," he said finally, his voice bitter. "Surrender the ship." The human strike force boarded quickly and efficiently. Hana led the assault team, her weapon ready. But there was no resistance. The Velixian soldiers had given up. They stood with their hands raised, too tired and scared to fight anymore. She found Daehyun in the medical bay, calmly treating a cut on his arm. Shix stood nearby, her weapon on the ground, defeated. "Sir," Hana said, relief flooding her voice. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Lieutenant," Daehyun replied. "How's Taemin and the others?" "All alive. Jiwon has some injuries, but nothing serious. They held engineering until we arrived." Daehyun nodded, satisfied. He stood and walked toward the bridge. Hana followed, along with a security team. Throughout the ship, Velixian soldiers watched him pass with fear in their eyes. This human, this Reaper, had defeated them all without an army, just with tactics, courage, and an absolute refusal to give up. On the bridge, Commander Vrax sat in his command chair, staring at nothing. When Daehyun entered, the Velixian commander looked up at him with something like respect mixed with hatred. You are just one man, Vrax said. How did you do this? Daehyun looked at him calmly. You thought capturing me made you strong, but it made you weak. You underestimated what a human can do when he fights for his people. You forgot that numbers don't matter when the enemy knows your every weakness. You made the mistake of thinking that having me in a cell meant you had won. He stepped closer to Vrax. But I want you to remember this, Commander. I want you to tell your superiors. Tell them what happened here. Tell them that there are millions of humans like me, soldiers who will never surrender, who will turn every prison into a battlefield, who will fight with everything they have, no matter the odds. Tell them that capturing a human soldier isn't a victory. It's a mistake. Vrax said nothing. What could he say? The human was right. They had captured the Reaper and it had destroyed them. As the Velixian crew was taken into custody and the ship was secured, Hana stood beside Daehyun on the bridge. She looked at the tactical displays showing the extent of the sabotage he had accomplished. Sir, Earth Command wants to broadcast this throughout the sector. They want the galaxy to know what happened here. Daehyun nodded slowly. Good, let them know. Let every alien species that thinks humans are weak see what happens when they test us. Let them learn that we don't break. We adapt, we survive, and we win. Rin, watching from a corner where he was being held with other Velixian soldiers, understood something profound. His people had started a war they couldn't win. Not because humans had better weapons or ships, but because humans had something the Velixians didn't understand. They had the will to never give up. And that made them unstoppable. 3 months had passed since the capture of Commander Vrax's war cruiser. The galaxy had changed in ways that nobody expected. The story of what happened spread like fire through space. Every species heard about the human colonel who had been captured, and then turned his prison into a battlefield. They heard how 6 humans had taken control of a ship with 300 enemy soldiers. They heard about the Reaper. The Velixian Empire, which had been advancing steadily into human space, suddenly stopped. Their invasion fleets pulled back to defensive positions. Their military leaders held emergency meetings. Something had broken inside their army, and that something was fear. Velixian soldiers began refusing orders to board human ships or take human prisoners. Reports came from across the front lines of entire units deserting, rather than face the possibility of capturing another human like the Reaper. Some Velixian commanders started requesting transfers to other war zones, anywhere away from human space. On Earth, Daehyun sat in a medical facility, recovering from his injuries. The wounds on his body were healing, but he felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical pain. He had done his job. He had survived. He had protected his crew, but the cost of that survival weighed on him. A military psychologist visited him regularly, asking questions about his experience. Daehyun answered politely but briefly. What could he tell her? That being the Reaper meant living in a state of constant awareness? That every moment of his capture had been spent calculating, planning, looking for weaknesses? That being a legend was exhausting? How do you feel about what happened? The psychologist asked during one session. I did what needed to be done, Daehyun replied. I kept my crew alive. I stopped the enemy from using us as propaganda. I sent a message that will save human lives. But how do you feel? He looked at her for a long moment. I feel like I did my job. That's all that matters. The Earth government wanted to give him medals. They wanted to parade him through the streets as a hero. They wanted to use his story to inspire recruitment. Daehyun refused all of it. He wasn't interested in glory. He just wanted to return to his unit and continue serving. Lieutenant Hana visited him often, bringing news from the front lines. The war with the Velixians was effectively over. Peace negotiations had begun. The Empire was requesting a ceasefire, claiming they wanted to avoid further conflict. They're terrified, Hana said with a slight smile. Intelligence reports say Velixian military morale has never been lower. They keep talking about the Reaper, about how humans can turn any situation into a weapon. Good, Daehyun said quietly. Fear will keep them from attacking again, at least for a while. The higher-ups want to promote you. Admiral, probably. They want you to lead the Special Operations Division officially. Daehyun shook his head. I work better in the field. Let someone else handle the politics and the medals. I'll do what I do best. Taimin also came to visit. The young private had been promoted to sergeant and assigned to an elite special forces unit. He looked different now, more confident. More hardened. The scared boy who had knelt on the Morning Star's bridge was gone, replaced by a soldier who had learned what it meant to never give up. "Sir, I wanted to thank you," Taemin said, "for keeping us alive, for showing us what's possible." "You did that yourself," Daehyun replied. "You held engineering with Ji-won. You bought the time we needed. That wasn't me. That was you choosing to fight. I want to be like you, sir. I want to join special operations. I want to make a difference." Daehyun looked at the young soldier seriously. "Then don't try to be like me, be better. The galaxy doesn't need one Reaper. It needs 1,000 soldiers who refuse to give up, who turn every disadvantage into an advantage, who protect their people no matter what." He stood and placed a hand on Taemin's shoulder. "You survived what most soldiers never face. You fought when the odds were impossible. You already have what it takes. Now go out there and show the galaxy what humans are really capable of." Far away in Velixian space, Rin sat in a quiet office writing his official report on the incident. He had been promoted to intelligence analyst after his observations during the human prisoner situation. Now he was tasked with helping his people understand what had gone wrong. He wrote carefully, choosing his words to make sure his superiors understood. "Humanity represents a threat we did not anticipate. Their strength does not come from superior technology or numbers. It comes from their psychology. They refuse to accept defeat. They adapt to any situation. They turn captivity into opportunity and disadvantage into advantage. The human called the Reaper is not an exception. He is an example. Intelligence suggests there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of human soldiers trained in similar methods. Each one represents the same threat level. Recommendation: the Velixian Empire should avoid conflict with humanity at all costs. Any military engagement must be carefully calculated. Taking human prisoners should be avoided. Underestimating human capabilities is a fatal mistake." He finished the report and sent it up the chain of command. He knew it would cause controversy. Many Velixian leaders still believed in their superiority, but Rin had seen the truth. He had looked into the Reaper's eyes and understood that some enemies cannot be defeated by traditional means. Shix, the former interrogator, now worked at a remote Velixian outpost far from human space. She had been demoted after the disaster with the human prisoner. Now she spent her days doing routine intelligence work, watching the borders of space. Sometimes late at night she thought about Daehyun, about his calm face during torture, about the cold calculation in his eyes, about how he had studied everything, learned everything, and used it all against them. She had tortured many prisoners in her career, but the Reaper had taught her something. Sometimes the prisoner was actually the one in control. Sometimes capture was just another form of attack. She would never make that mistake again. None of the Velixians would. 6 months after the incident, Daehyun was finally cleared to return to active duty. He stood on the observation deck of a military training station, watching young soldiers go through their exercises. These were the next generation of human defenders inspired by stories of the Reaper and others like him. Hana found him there, looking out at the stars beyond the station. "Thinking about what comes next?" she asked. "Always," he replied. "The Velixians are quiet now, but there are other threats out there. Other species that might think humans are easy targets. Let them try," Hana said with confidence. "They'll learn the same lesson the Velixians did." Daehyun nodded. "Maybe, but we can't rely on fear alone. We need to keep training, keep preparing. Keep making sure that every human soldier knows they can survive anything if they refuse to give up." He turned away from the window and looked at Hana. "The Reaper is just a name. Just a story. But what it represents, that's real. It's the idea that humans don't break, that we adapt and survive and fight back. That's what will keep us safe. Not me, not any single soldier, but all of us together, refusing to be victims." Below them in the training halls, instructors were teaching new recruits the lessons learned from the Velixian incident: how to survive capture, how to turn imprisonment into opportunity, how to study the enemy and use their strengths against them. They were learning to be like the Reaper, and that terrified humanity's enemies more than any weapon ever could. Across the galaxy, in diplomatic halls and military headquarters, alien species were adjusting their policies toward humanity. New rules were written, new protocols established. The message was clear: do not underestimate humans. Do not assume they are weak. Do not capture their soldiers if you can avoid it. And never ever think you have won just because you have them in a cell. Because humans don't stay prisoners. They become hunters. They become weapons. They become the very thing their captors should have feared from the beginning. Years later, young aliens would hear stories about the Reaper. Some would think it was just a legend, an exaggeration. But the older ones, the ones who had been in the war, they knew the truth. They had learned the hard way what it meant to capture a human soldier. They had learned that behind every human's apparent weakness was an iron will to survive. That humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their ships or their technology. It was their refusal to accept defeat. Dae-hyun returned to active duty and continued serving for many more years. He trained countless soldiers. He completed countless missions. He saved countless lives. But he never forgot the lesson he had taught the Velixians. The lesson that spread throughout the galaxy and changed how every species viewed humanity. That humans weren't just survivors. They were warriors who turned every challenge into an opportunity. Every capture into a counterattack. Every moment of weakness into a display of strength. And as long as even one human remembered that lesson, as long as soldiers like Dae-hyun existed to teach it to the next generation, humanity would never be conquered. They would bend but never break. They would adapt but never surrender. They would fight on no matter the odds, no matter the cost, because that was what it meant to be human. And that was why the galaxy would always remember the name, the Reaper.